We continue now at the top of Daf Peyam and Beis in Meseches Eruvin. This is Eruvin Daf 80b. The Gemara was just trying to prove that we can force somebody, or even without someone's knowledge, we can force them to join an Eruv. So the Gemara had brought a proof because it says that you can force somebody to join with a Korah, with the building of a Korah or a Lechi. And the Gemara on that says, Shani Hasam Deleka Mechitza. So over there, maybe it's a little different. There you're allowed to force because there are no walls. Rashi says, Shani Hasam Deleka Mechitza, so Mavui Megulu. It's an open Mavui. Veino Noach L'Shomer. It's not easy to guard. Hilkach Kofano. So that's why in that particular case, you're able to force him. Avolahatir betiltel, but if all you're trying to do, you're not building any structures, all you're trying to do is matir, moving by making an eruv, liolamei malach tuvin das. Maybe in those cases you really do need das. And the Gemara gives another answer, lishna acharina, another possible answer, mitzad shani, from the side it is different. Now there is some discussion in the Achronim what exactly this second answer of the Gemara is. We will not get into all the different commentaries. We will just note that the Bach takes out this line altogether. Gemara now continues. Itmar was taught. Rav Chia bar Ashi Yomer. Rav Chia bar Ashi says, Osin lechi ashera. A person can make a lechi out of an ashera tree. Again, an ashera tree is a tree that was worshipped as avodah zarah. Rabbi Shimon Lakish Amar Osin Korah ashera. Rabbi Shimon Lakish says a person can make a korah, the beam that is put at the front of a mavui. He can make that out of an ashera tree. And the Gemara now elaborates. Mando Amar Korah, the one who says a beam can be made from an ashera tree, Kol Shekain Lechi, for sure a lechi could be made from an ashera tree. Umando Amar Lechi, the one who says that a lechi can be made from an ashera tree, Avol Korah lo, but a korah is problematic, Kesuse Michtas Shiure, because there's a shear that's required for the korah, and that shear is considered to not be reached when the item is Asr Bahana. Rashi says, Kol Shekain Lechi, Dein lo shir l'rochvo va'ovyav. When it comes to a lechi, there's no measurement for its width and its thickness. So since there's no minimum amount, no size that it needs, so therefore it could even be made from something that is that needs to be destroyed, that needs to be burned like avodah zarah. Avol korah tzricha tefach lekabel riach. When it comes to the beam that you put on the top of the entrance of the mavui, that needs to be a tefach in order to be able to hold a brick, and it also needs to be strong enough to hold a brick. When it comes to an ashera tree, kevan deboy streifa, an ashera tree not only is it prohibited to get benefit, you have to burn it. It says you got to burn the ashera. Halachically, it's like it's burned; it has no shear. So the lechi, which there's no requirement of a shear, so then in that particular situation, it's more likely that it would be okay to be an ashera tree. But when it comes to a korah which has a shear, so then that becomes less likely. There's a famous question here. Rav Chaim asks, and it's not going to get into this, but doesn't a lechi also have a shear in terms of its height? And again, that question is asked and discussed by many of the commentaries. The Gemara now continues with the Mishnah. Nismai ta'ochel. If, let's say, the food that's used for the Eruv, it diminishes in the amount. It doesn't have the same shear as it had before. Mosif u'mezaka vein tzarich lodia. You can add on, and you could be mezaka to the residents of the mavui, make them owners of that which you added, and you don't even need to let them know. Nitosvu alei. Now, on the other hand, if let's say more residents come into the mavui, so then mosif u'mezaka v'tzarich lodia. In that case, you have to add on some food, and you're mezaka to them as well, but you need to let them know that you're including them in the Eruv. In the first case, all the residents already were once included. You can assume they're going to continue to want to be included, but in this case, totally new residents, you need to let them know. Kama u'shirun, how much is the shear of the amount of food you need for the Eruv? Bisman shein merubin, if there's a lot of residents, mazon shtei sudas lekulam, it's enough to have 2 meals for everybody, meaning a total of 2 meals. Bisman shein muat, and if there's just a few residents, kegrogras l'chol echad v'echad, then it's the amount of a dried fig for each individual, which even though in total it's less than 2 seudos, that's going to be enough. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, this shear is said when you're making the Eruv in the first place. But if let's say it got a little bit smaller, even if you have any amount remaining, that is still okay. Finally, the Mishnah says the only reason why we have Eruv Chatzeros anyway is in order that the children should not forget the concept of Eruv. Rashi explains, meaning once you already made a Shitufei Mavos, that should be good enough according to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is saying that's true, but we make an Eruv Chatzeros so people should not forget in future generations about the concept of Eruv Chatzeros. Gemara says, B'mai Askinan, what's the case over here where it says, Rashi explains, the Katani ben Ismail in Tzarech Lodia. It says that if the amount of food diminished, you don't need to let the residents know. Hakala Lagamri Tzarech Lodia. So the Gemara is assuming that if the food would not just be diminished, but would be totally gone, then you would need to let them know in Bala Arif if you want to make new food and replenish completely. So what are we talking about over here where if it totally diminishes, you need to let them know? Ilema b'min echad. If you're going to say we're talking about you're adding on, you're replenishing with the exact same food that was lost, Ma'ir Nismaid Afilu Kolanami, then the halacha should be even if it's totally diminished. Who cares if you're using the same food? Why should you have to let them know? Ela b'shnei minim. So you're going to say, okay, so I'm using some other type of food. Afilu Nismaid Namilo. Well, in that case, even if it diminished, you should have to inform the residents. You shouldn't be able to just do it without telling them. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, Kol ha'ochel, it says that if the food completely was consumed, if it's from the same food you're replenishing, you don't need to let them know. And if it's from two different kinds of foods, you do need to let them know. Gemara answers two possible answers. You could say our Mishnah means it's the same food. You could say our Mishnah means it's a different food. It could be the word nismait actually means nismatmate. It was completely consumed. If it was, and even when it's completely consumed, if it's the same type of food, you don't need to let them know. Or you could answer mishnei minim. The Mishnah is talking about two minim and kolashani. And if it gets completely consumed, it's different. According to this answer, the Gemara is saying that when the Brisa says that by two minim you need to let the residents know, it's talking about when it's totally consumed. And our Mishnah is talking about only nismait. And the halacha really does draw a distinction between when it's completely consumed and when it's nismait, even by two minim. Gemara now continues with the two dots. Nitosva alei and mosifu mezake. If you have more residents, then you have to let them know. Amar Rav Shizbi, Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Shizbi says in the name of Rav Chisda, Zos Omeres Chalukan Olav Chaver Val Rabbi Yehuda. This shows that this Mishnah argues with the position of Rabbi Yehuda that we're about to quote. The Tanan we learned in the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, when is this true? It's true by Eruvin Techumin. Avo be'Eruvin Chatzeros, but when it comes to Eruvin Chatzeros, Ma'arvin, Bein Ladas, Ubein Shalol Ladas. You can make an Eruvin Chatzeros, whether with the people's knowledge, whether they don't have knowledge, and that's not like our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seems to say that you need to inform them, they need to have das. Gemara says, Pshita de Chalukin, isn't it obvious that there's a machlokas going on over here? What's even the Chiddush that Rav Chisda is saying? The Gemara answers, no, it is a Chiddush. Ma'u detema, because what might you have thought if Rav Chisda would not have come along and said that Rav Yehuda argues on our Mishnah, you might have thought, Hani mili b'chotzer shebein shnei mavos, that in the Mishnah where you need to inform the residents, that's because the chotzer is sitting between two mavos. There's two different mavos involved here. You don't know which one they want to join. Aval chotzer shel mavo yachadei malo. When it comes to a chotzer that just belongs to one mavo, that's what Rabbi Yehuda was talking about when he says you don't need to inform them. Kamash malo, then no, there's no such distinction. And in reality, we're talking about mavo yachad both in the Mishnah and Rabbi Yehuda's case, and they're arguing. The Mishnah holds you need to inform the residents, and Rabbi Yehuda holds you don't need to inform the residents. Kamahu shiyuro, then again the Mishnah ends. How much is the amount that you need in order to make the eruv? So the Gemara now says Kamahu merubin. What's considered a lot of people? Again, the Mishnah said that if you have a lot of people, you just do 2 meals total. If you have less, if you don't have so many people, then it's grogros l'chol echad v'yachad. So how much is considered a lot of people? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Shmona Esrei b'nei Adam. 18 people is a lot of people. Gemara says Shmona Esrei v'sulo. Is it exactly 18? Ema mishmona Esrei v'elach means 18 or more. If you have 18 or more residents, then already you do two meals and that's sufficient. Umay Shmona Esrei denakat. What's this number of 18? Amar Rav Yitzchak b'rei de Rav Yehuda. Rav Yitzchak says. Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Yehuda, says, "Ledidim farshli minei da'aba." To me, it was explained in the name of Abba. Kol she'ilu mechalko lemazon shtei seudos beinein ve'ein magas kurogros l'chol echad v'yachad heinein merubin. If you have a situation where if you would take 2 meals and divide it up among everybody, and it wouldn't even be a grogros for each person, that's already a lot of people. That's when we say just do 2 meals. Because if you gave grogros to each person, it would actually end up being more than 2 meals. V'sagi b'mazon shtei seudos. In such a situation, it's enough with 2 meals. V'ilo, and now if you have a situation where a grogros for each one is going to end up, if you would divide up rather 2 meals, and it's going to end up being more than a grogros for each person, so then mu'atin, and then that's already a few people, and then you only need to do a grogros for each person. You don't need to do 2 meals, because that's going to end up being more than a grogros for each person. V'agav orche kamashmalan, and agav orche, derech agav, what do we learn from all this? We learned the shtei seudos have in shmona esrei grogros. It comes out if you do the math. 2 meals is actually 18 grogros. That's exactly the number we're stating over here. That's why when you get to 18 people, the amount becomes 2 meals and not a grogros for each individual, because now you've already reached the point where a grogros for each person is already going to be 2 meals or more. The Gemara now continues with the Mishnah, B'chol ma'arvin u'mishtatzvin. You can use any food to make an eruv or a shitufei mavos chutz min hamayim u'min hamelech, except you can't use water and you cannot use salt. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua says, Kikor hu eruv. A kikor meaning if you have a full loaf, that can be an eruv. Afilu ma'afe sa'av hu prusa ein marvin ba. But if you would have a baked item, which is even very large, it's a sa'ah, but it's all cut up, that you cannot make, that you cannot use as an eruv. But kikar, but if you have a loaf, ki iser, even if it's as small as an iser, v'ushalim, but it's full, ma'arvin bo, that's going to be good enough for an eruv. Rashi over here says kikar shalim ma'af sa'ah bekikar echad v'natal mimenu mat. The case over here is you baked a sa'ah, so it was a large amount in a kikar, and you took a little. V'shav yaprusa, so you ended up that you broke off a little of it. So it's almost a full sa'ah. Ain marvin, but you can't make an eruv. A time of first begamar. The Gemara will explain that. Kikar katan kamidas iser. Now, if it is a small one like an iser, v'hushale marvin bo, and it's full, then you can make an eruv. Rashi points out importantly, uvilvad yusham kikaros harbi kegrogros l'chol echad v'echad. You're going to need enough kikaros in order to have a grogros for each resident. That we're not arguing with. The point is that each kikar can be very small as long as it is a full kikar, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph.